Hello and welcome to a Team Warrior Robotics event recap. On June 28th, my dad competed at Macro Summer Broken with his now plastic ant weight combat robot, Sliceserve. I already talked about how good the event was in my Outpost 31 recap, so I'll get straight to the robot stuff. Before I get to the fights though, Sliceserve has some backstory. Sliceserve started out as a full combat ant called Kickserve, where I designed the chassis for my dad, and he gave me input about what he wanted the other parts of the robot to look like. It's always been a two-wheel drive lifter. Kickserve competed at Motorama earlier this year, where my dad drove it and it went 0-2, but was clearly a durable robot, taking both fights to the judges, including one against a very good opponent. My dad couldn't make it to Rabbit in May, so I drove Kickserve, and it got in the box. It went 0-2 again against two very tough opponents, and at least had a very strong showing in a grudge match. For this macro event, we decided to turn Kickserve into a plastic ant so we could 3D print all of the parts and TPU that I already had, and because it would probably take less damage. Macro is also mostly plastic ants, so there would be less waiting between fights. Besides the pre-existing parts being converted to TPU, the front end was now flat and lined with forks to hopefully make Sliceserve a much better control bot. We also switched to a more powerful servo with more range of motion, which is the same one used in Outpost 31. Sliceserve's first opponent was Macking Cheese from the Michael Wave, driven by Bob, who runs Blue Marlin at NHRL. I'm going to call it Macking Cheese for the same reason that I abbreviated Huge Thunderstorm Nightmare. Macking Cheese is a two-wheel drive robot with a huge drum spinner on the front. It's basically all weapon. This seemed like a pretty decent matchup for Sliceserve, because forks tend to be good at sliding underneath drums and gaining control over them. When the fight starts, Macking Cheese oversteers and allows Sliceserve to push it into the wall and lift it up onto its drum. Sliceserve pins him and does a little tapping, and when he backs off, Macking Cheese is stuck on his own drum. His drum bounces him back onto his wheels, but Sliceserve pins and lifts him again, this time with some really aggressive tapping. Macking Cheese self-rights off of Sliceserve, and then hits the backside and takes control. He lands a bunch of small hits, and bends one of Sliceserve's forks on top of another one. Macking Cheese gets a few more smaller hits in. He slams into the wall, and then gets another hit in. Here you can see how my dad was having trouble keeping the front end pointed at his opponent, allowing Macking Cheese to get another flip, and then another one, and then another one, and then one more, and then a follow-up to that one. Suddenly, Macking Cheese's drum stops working, but Sliceserve decides to back into him, allowing Macking Cheese to get a pin. Sliceserve gets under him for a moment, but ends up getting pinned twice more. While Macking Cheese tries to start its drum by running into the wall, Sliceserve gets a final pin before the fight goes to the judges. Sliceserve lost the decision, which is probably the right call, because Macking Cheese from the Michael Wave was in control for the majority of the fight. The only reason it might have been a little closer is because his spinner died. That fight started off really well, but as soon as Macking Cheese got space, my dad couldn't keep up with him, because he doesn't have very much experience driving in the arena. There were clearly some issues with oversteering and erratic driving that come from a lack of fight experience, which will just improve over time. Fortunately, there was next to no damage done. A few of the forks got bent and stuck behind the one next to them, but that just had to be put back into place, and there were some scratches that were completely cosmetic. Now Sliceserve was in the loser's bracket and had one more chance to continue in the tournament. His next opponent would be Ultraviolet, a wide two-wheel drive vertical spinner, and I think it had a TPU weapon at this point. This didn't seem like a terrible matchup, but it definitely wasn't ideal and would require more controlled driving. The fight starts with Ultraviolet gaining the upper hand with some small hits. Then Sliceserve gets flipped. An exchange occurs where neither robot is able to gain control over the other, and their forks interlock. Sliceserve gets popped in the corner again, and then catches Ultraviolet from the side and bullies it into the wall. The lifter does its job, and my dad starts slapping him. The pin is released with a very forceful lift, and Ultraviolet ends up on its back. He rights himself quickly and shows some control before getting another real hit. Sliceserve gets pinned, but momentarily turns it around on his opponent. You can see that both robots' forks are just long enough where it's hard for them to really engage with each other head-on. Sliceserve takes a forceful hit to the backside, and then makes a driving mistake that allows the same thing to happen again. He takes another hit while upside down, then he exposes the back again, and Ultraviolet capitalizes. Sliceserve gets flipped and pushed around before oversteering and taking yet another hit on the back of the robot. Ultraviolet throws Sliceserve into the air a couple times as it starts to land some bigger hits. The back and underside of Sliceserve continue to get scratched up in the corner, and a little bit of damage is done to the lifter on one of these hits. Ultraviolet remains in control for the last few seconds of the fight as it goes to the judges again. Slicerv lost what I imagine was a very decisive decision, but once again, it survived with minimal damage. One of the tiny forks on the tip of the lifter was ripped off. The forks got bent again. There were some small pieces missing from various parts. The side of the right fork tip was gone, and the bottom had some scuffs, and the layers started to peel a bit at the very back, but all of this is mostly cosmetic. Since it's a double elimination tournament, that's it for Slicerv at this event. Sadly, it went 0-2 again, and the Serve line of robots have yet to get an official win at this point. The durability was fantastic this time, and the robot went the whole event without taking any sort of functional damage. There wasn't really anything to improve on the robot, instead it just comes down to my dad's inexperience with driving during a fight. He just needs to take it a little bit slower and work on facing the opponent more. Right now, I still have 6 recaps to do before I'm caught up, but I'm sure I won't finish them all before the November events. The next one will be an interesting change, because Outpost 31 and Slicerv fought as a Beetleweight multi-bot called Slicepost 31 at Hive Hysteria. That should be a fun one. Thank you for watching this event recap of Slicerv at Macro Summer Broken.